Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through our perpetually lefty Pinko Kami Soy Boy Cuck Antifa Super Soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate taste of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. In 2024, I'm switching up and taking it back to the basics. I'm a socialist trying to grapple with our world by reflecting on it through art, theory, and the will of the people. So, Craig, what other pop culture are you getting into these days? We got some good stuff here. I'm excited to talk about it.
I've been getting into Dune. Well, I saw Dune 1 originally when it came out, and I just saw Dune 2 and loved it. And that made me go up and find the copy of Dune that I have that I never read, and I'm about 600 pages in, and it's fucking cool, and I love it.
Nice. I that is one thing that is, I think, joyful about adaptations is being able to have that like reiterative relationship where you can kind of circle back between the different sources of things. Now there's like perversions of that obviously when we get into like the MCU, but I think it is really lovely to like watch a movie and be like, oh, I'm gonna go read that book. Like I did that when I rewatched Suddenly last summer, probably a couple of months ago, earlier in the summer, and then I went and read the play. And then came back to it. So what were your thoughts about Dune Part 2?
Loved it. Loved all of it. I'm now having a hard time because I'm reading the book remembering what was Dune Part 2 versus Dune Part 1 because the two movies are the first book basically. Loved it. Fade Rauta, the Elvis guy whose name I can't ever remember. What's that guy's name? The guy that played Elvis.
Austin Butler.
Yes. Haven't really ever liked him in a movie that much, but I thought
he goes crazy.
He's fun in this.
Yeah.
He's so weird.
I think that he is an actor that is a little limited by his beauty.
Yeah.
In that, like, I think he has the talent and soul of a character actor who's just a little too pretty boy. So I feel like in his 40s, we're gonna get like some really
I think he annoys me because I think he knows he's hot and there's
he definitely did that voice. Every iteration of whatever voice he's doing.
I can't stop doing the Elvis thing, which is so annoying. But then after that, I watched Jodorowsky's Dune, the documentary from 2013 about Alejandro Jodorowsky trying to make a Dune adaptation with like Salvador Dali and Orson Welles and H.R. Geiger and like all these crazy people. Giger, excuse me. But I really like that because I think it he goes on a rant at the end basically saying this about how, and I think it's indicative even though he was trying to make it in the 70s, but it is indicative of where cinema was going and where it is now, that it's kind of, we're stuck in this like nightmare where cinema is just completely tied to like commodities and stuff. And I really liked his like basically like breakdown at the end where he's like screaming. He's like super personable too and really fun to like listen to. And then at the end he's just like screaming about
he's
how
a wild man.
Yeah, how he's like pissed. Like, why can't I do it? Which I was like, okay, cool. And then I saw Bones and All.
Love.
I know. Okay, that was what I know you had seen it, and I couldn't remember. If you liked
I'm a
it
big fan of Luca. Yes.
Yeah. I like that quite a bit as well. Even I think I've talked about this that I don't quite get Mark Rylance in a lot of stuff. He kind of weirds me out, and he's being weird again in this. And like,
he's being very weird.
This like needs it.
Oh, for sure. Like, he is appropriately haunting.
Yeah. It's the ones like that Ready Player One where I was like, why are you being so weird in this dumbass video game movie?
I have definitely, or maybe I haven't, but I really turned the corner on him when I watched Angels and Insects.
Okay.
Which came out in the 90s and is based on a short story. Speaking of going back and like watching a movie then reading, where it's very like high society England, where there is some creeping undercurrent of decadence and filth underneath. And he's really delightful in that. And I was like, okay, I'm now understanding you. And he's not like a heartthrob in it, but he is the romantic lead. And it shifted my perspective on him. And then I watched some of his older roles and was like, okay, I see where we're coming from.
To be fair, I have not seen that much of him, and most of it has been recent stuff where he's playing in like big, broad stuff. Like the Ready Player One is, I thought, a really stupid movie anyway, so I don't know if we can blame him for being broad and overacting. But he was good in that Nolan thing. What was that one called? Dunkirk.
Yeah,
I liked him in that.
I mean,
he was in that, right? He was the like citizen boat driver. Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about before. I like a war movie, so it's got to be pretty bad for me to have negative feelings about it. But Bones and All. Speaking of turning the corner, Bones and All is what made me turn the corner on Timmy. Mm-hmm. Is I was like,
he's good.
All right, bitch, showing up. Like, I mean, he's good in Call Me by Your Name. I'm not saying, but you know, the like. A male version of a wayfish ingenue is like not necessarily my thing.
Yeah.
And he was doing something a little funky, a little offbeat, but that ultimately felt like it had like a heart at the center of it. I need to revisit it. I saw Bones and All in the theaters and I haven't watched it since.
Yeah.
So I need to watch it again.
Hell yeah. I want to watch it again too. I was trying to get Jess to watch it after I saw it. She's like, I don't know if I want to see that one. And I think she would like it. And then I started describing parts of it to it. And she's like, I'm not going to watch that.
Yeah, it's the like punctuated violence in it. But I do think that there is a core to it that is not totally dissimilar from, which is funny because I don't like Only Lovers Left Alive. But she loves that movie. And I do think there is a similar spirit of like the ways in which like mortality and love are tied to each other indivisibly, that I think is relevant there.
I also saw it as like a metaphor for like younger generations grappling with like the curse of older generations. I don't know if you saw that as much, but like we see obviously the two leads are like young people dealing with cannibal fever or whatever they call it that they have, and we see like compared to Mark Rylance's character who's been basically driven mad by it. And a lot of the movie, I feel like, is those two trying to come to terms with how they're going to live life like this. I don't know. I don't. That's a very loose thought, but I enjoy thinking of it like that.
I think that makes sense. There's definitely a theme in Luca's work of cross-generational conflict. Yeah, right. Like, all that, I think obviously in Call Me by Your Name, that's drawn out very explicitly, but I think it's a significant theme in Suspiria as well. Sure. His Suspiria adaptation, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. Indeed. What about, so you got one other listed here, something I'm a major fan of.
A couple nights ago watched Love Lies Bleeding, which is fun. I didn't know what the story was really, other than it was like a crime thing. First off, everyone looks hot or cool or hot and cool in this movie, including, this might be controversial, but Ed Harris looks like a goddamn badass in this movie with that stupid hair. Those shots of Red in like the flashback with his crazy ass hair and him just looking like a demon staring at the camera are so fucking scary.
I love a movie that both is, one, great.
Yeah.
2 is hot and filthy. And 3 makes me just like feverishly excited for whatever this director does next. Like Rose Glass, fucking killing it. Like, it was cool. If number 1 is Saint Maud and number 2 is this, like what is next is just like really exciting, you know, and seeing through the cloud of IP drivel and being like, there's someone doing really weird shit that has like a blood flowing through it, you know.
I did have one gripe, but I want to see if you agree.
Okay.
Is that like, there's obviously an element of magical realism in it, and can we talk about what it is? I know it's like halfway through. Do you think that's a spoiler?
I mean, I think we can go into it.
She like hulks out throughout the movie, like where she's just like she's already muscly, but she becomes like almost like a werewolf, like
throbbing. Yes, like there is some kind of preternatural strength that is developed.
It would have been stronger if that was just a unexplained like reaction rather than that looping that part in about her taking steroids, where it's kind of mix. Like I think the thing is like, is it supposed to be the steroids? Is it supposed to be something else? And I think if it removed the steroid and it was just her like grappling with this new like hulking out every time she's trying to protect Kristen Stewart or whatever.
I think this is like a very specific dyke culture thing, basically, like of mask women flirting with female masculinity, utilizing testosterone recreationally, not necessarily to transition fully, and steroid use. So I think that it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me.
And that makes more sense too, because
to have it be sparking sexuality and violence, like in the same action.
Yeah, because they don't hook up. Do they hook up before she takes the steroids?
They do it together. When she's in the gym alone. When I forget the character's name, but when Katie O'Brien is in the gym and Kristen Stewart is like watching her and moves from that kind of voyeuristic perspective to engaging her, they do it together.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. But I also wanted, like, Kristen Stewart's good in this too. I feel like I always have to defend her because she still gets so much hate from like Twilight shit that
I
know movie fans like have come around obviously to like respect her and all that, but I feel like when I talk to people who aren't huge movie people, they're like, oh, the Twilight girl. So I feel like I want to take every opportunity to be like, she's cool and she's made a shit ton of cool movies since Twilight.
For sure. And I think she's good in the role. I think that some of her which works, what I'm about to say works in this role, but a lot of her like acting strength is in kind of the person who shies away, is a little bit of the like wilting flower. And I would really love to see her do something that is totally more outside of that.
And
and I think again that works really well here. She has to be weak-willed and then be pushed into a transformation by the circumstances and by being confronted with love that is like strong and virulent. But I would like to see K-Stu push that shit into next year because I do think she has it in her.
What is the closest she's come to like a bubbly role?
I don't even.
She's not even bubbly in that. She's supposed to be kind of the similar.
Style,
but
I don't even. Bubbly isn't interesting. I wasn't even thinking that so much as just like strong and not like that the character has a strong personality from the beginning, as opposed to like that being part of the transformation. I think she could do it, and I'd like to see it.
But I didn't like it. But I think she plays that kind of person unless I'm wrong, maybe it's the other way around, but in that movie American Ultra that was written by Max Landis, I think she is like a badass that hooks up with this not hooks up in a sexual sense, but like hooks up with a stoner played by Jesse Eisenberg, if I remember that correctly. I'm trying to see. I think so. But yeah, but with that movie.
Yeah, I can
written
see
by
that.
Max Landis, so
and
when I say it stings.
There's some other stuff that she's done, like in Snow White and the Huntsman. Like she's not necessarily that kind of wilting character, but like I just mean some of these like independent dramas that she's done. Yeah. I would love to see some just boldness out of her.
She's always playing someone that has like a major cross to bear, I guess. And there's like, take some of that burden off and let her do her thing.
Yeah.
What about you? What you been watching?
So our household for the last several weeks has been, I'm going to say rewatching, because for my husband it is a rewatch. I am diving in for the first time.
Oh,
Lost.
Hell yeah.
So Lost dropped on Netflix, I don't know, probably like 2 months ago or a month and a half ago. Like we started it very shortly after it dropped. So when they could line up, my household didn't watch it, and that was coming out, in the very early 2000s.
Yeah.
So I would have been in like fifth, sixth grade. That was not something I would have been watching independently. So I never saw it at the time. But as a youth who was raised on Entertainment Weekly, that was really my vector into pop culture. I know everybody's names. I know the actors who are on it. I know the grand disappointment. Through the cultural osmosis of that moment, I've internalized a lot of that stuff. But so I was really, when Mike was like, let's watch it, I was like, sure, let's dive in.
Hell yeah.
Even knowing that endpoint and the collective experience of disappointment, I wanted to see. And I have been loving it.
I I am an enormous fan and still defender, even though, like, I'm not, it does disappoint to some degrees. But
what Mike says is that 4 of the 6 seasons are great.
I'll agree.
And so the thing that is lovely for me as someone who frequently abandons television series is great. When it sucks, I'll stop watching it. And I think that the thing that I am really enjoying about it that has nothing to do with I don't fucking care what's going on. Like, I don't need some grand overarching explanation, because the thing for me that really sings in this show is people's penance and transformational experiences between the life that they had before and their life post plane crash. And the magic is whatever those elements are, and the mystery are, like, provide fruitful context for the evolution. I really don't care what's going on underneath that for it to be powerful.
I feel like you will like all of it, because I always said that, and I don't, no judgment if you're one or the other, but, like, I always said, if you're, like, a hard sci-fi person that wants all the, like, science of it explained and all that, you're gonna be hella disappointed. But if you're coming to it because of the, like, emotional resonance and kind of the weird, like, spiritual elements that the characters get sucked into, I think even the disappointing finale, that pays off pretty well.
Okay. Yeah, we're almost done with season 2. I think I have the finale of season 2.
Who's your favorite?
So, I think it evolves.
Okay.
I don't love Kate.
Yeah, Jack and Kate can fuck off.
I am intrigued by Jack. I think the idea of someone who feels called to be a leader, but has not grappled with their own shit to be able to fully step into the role is an interesting characterization. Kate just feels like a ball of trauma, and also I just have to say, like, Evangeline Lilly is too pretty to be playing the character. Like, it's just not believable. I don't believe that this beautiful elven creature is like killing people. Like, I just don't. So that is poor casting, in my opinion, that makes it hard for me to be like, yeah, she's running around in the Australian outback. Totally. Absolutely. That woman. I love Sun and Jin.
Awesome.
I also think that Daniel Dae Kim is one of the more beautiful human beings that's ever existed.
Sculpted.
Yes. So whenever his cheekbones are on screen, I'm like, wow. But I really like the dynamic of their relationship thus far. Not that it's good, but it is interesting, dramatic. And then I am fascinated by Locke,
Yeah.
And whatever is going on there.
I think you will continue to be fascinated by Locke, because I think he's the most fun character to, like, track over the seasons. And, like,
I mean, the fanatic, someone who is a fanatic where you're not able to totally see the contours of their obsession. Yeah. And it continues to kind of move around.
And his obsession was, like, born from the plane crash, basically.
Right.
So, like, his obsession is, like, wholly new, and we see the life of it through the show.
And I think there's, everything prior that at least I've seen up through season 2, all of his life prior to the plane crash is basically, like, him being subjected to things that he has no control over and having, like, no subjectivity. Like, he's just like, yeah, you want that for me? Yes, I'll do it. Yeah. Yes, I am your victim. And then once he realizes that he can walk, that presents a totally new moment where everything that came before comes to bear on it, but it's all inverted. And it's really interesting to see it play out. So I am liking it. It is interesting to watch a show just, like, kill off so many characters where that's not necessarily my conception of it in terms of the cultural osmosis and expectations.
Who has died by season 2?
So Shannon dies in she gets shot by fucking Ana Lucia. Michelle Rodriguez character. I fucking hate her. Yeah. I mean, of course, she's a cop.
I was thinking she doesn't show up till the end of season 3, so I was trying not to spoil it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, she shoots her.
That's right, because they're going to go have a picnic. No.
They have the picnic.
Okay.
Yeah. It's later. Saeed. Oh, I like Saeed a lot. His there. And I will say, I'm not saying that's done perfectly, but it's done with more compassion. Like Saeed's character, if you are not familiar with Lost, is a member of the Iraqi Republican Guard.
And this came out in 2005, 6, something like that.
Yeah.
Right at like when a lot
we
of
are
America
invading Iraq.
Still thought Iraq
we are
was
in Iraq.
a good idea.
Yes. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there that I think it chews on delicately. More so than I would expect. Also, the really interesting thing about this, I've definitely talked about it on the pod before. I love the Watchmen TV show. I mean, I like all of Watchmen, and I even am a little bit of a defender of Snyder's movie at this point in time, though I was not in 2009 when it came out. But I love the TV show, and you can in my opinion, you can absolutely see like Lindelof, like a clear carry through of like the themes that he's invested in.
I do feel sorry for him because like he took the Lost hate pretty hard, and like he still talks about that shit, which is like sad. But I'm glad that he's created other cool shit from that.
I mean, I will reserve, I guess, total judgment until I see the full thing, or however much that I see, until I give up. But it's just like, I think there are a lot of complex themes in this show that it doesn't shock me that people were not totally thrilled with. Like the show is ultimately, I'm not trying to say like, oh, it's highbrow, but it's ultimately posing philosophical questions. For sure. And if that's not what you're seeking out of TV, of course you're going to be disappointed by not having answers neatly handed to you. And I do agree, the one friend I have who was, when I heard I was watching Lost, was like, the ending was fucking horrible, is a hard sci-fi person.
And I like hard sci-fi too in certain occasions.
Me too, but this person is like they're like straight down the line.
I feel like what attracted you to Lost to begin with, was it the mysteries and the sci-fi or the characters and all that? Fuck, I was gonna say something else about Lost and I lost it. I didn't mean to do that. I would also say, like, I think it was also like the prototype or the first major like puzzle box show, and I don't think they really knew how to do those yet, right? Like we want to tell a long form story where all these mysteries, so like the common accusation is the first 2 seasons they're just throwing everything out there, and then you'll learn about some of it as the show goes on. There are definitely things that they're like, what the fuck was the deal with that? And it just never really comes back up. But that's okay too. Yeah, and I think that was like they kind of were creating this puzzle box genre that didn't have that name at the time, but I don't know, it's still doing interesting shit, even in its.
Yeah, I could honestly stop watching the show. Like, I could never watch another episode of the show right now. Yeah, and I would be satisfied with what I've viewed. So, that's definitely going to keep watching. I'm just saying, like, and maybe some of this is the wisdom of time, and some of it is like hindsight is 2020, and being able to reflect and not be overly invested in having expectations around everything being solved. But I'm enjoying it. Hell yeah. The other thing I wanted to raise is this week I watched a movie called Rats. And I said it like that because there's a exclamation point at the end of it.
Like the Ghost song. That's what it's about?
No.
The band Ghost has a song that is called Rats. That is spelled. Yes. Yeah. And the chorus, he just goes, Rats!
That is seemingly, in terms of spirit, on par with what's going on in this movie, which is fucking Nutter Butters. Yeah. There are multiple times in this movie where I went, what? Like that. This movie, I'm not going to say release because it's not available really yet, but it is coming out in 2024. I saw it because it is playing at the Tallahassee Film Festival on August 31st, 2024 at 8:30 p.m. at the Challenger Learning Center in Venue 2, because there's 2 of different screens in the Challenger Learning Center, so it's in the one that's labeled Venue 2. It is so I was given a screener of it for assisting with screening shorts. So I want to, one, really strongly encourage people to see it if they're in Tallahassee. 2, it apparently played at Fantasia Fest and was very popular. Where's there. I don't remember, but I know that was like its debut. So I think when it plays at the Tallahassee Film Festival, that will be one of the, it won't be the first time, but it will be one of the first times that it's played. It is about a young man who gets caught vandalizing a phone booth in a city called Fresno, Texas. That's spelled P-F. Fresno.
Cool.
And is blackmailed by a insane lady cop who catches him into trying to rat out his cousin, who everyone believes, or at least this insane cop believes, is drug trafficking.
Okay.
And I cannot give any other details.
That sounds dope.
Because it's just balls to the wall insanity.
Yeah.
Like some of the nastiest stuff I've ever seen on outside of that Black Emmanuel movie that had real bestiality in it. Some really crazy practical nasty effects.
Cool.
It's very funny. There is weird splashiness. There's a strong professional wrestling spirit in it.
Okay.
It is definitely worth seeing. If you were squeamish or easily grossed out by poop, I would not watch the movie. But
I am, but I'm still gonna watch it.
It's
it
definitely
cool.
fake poop. I will say that. It's for sure fake poop.
I've been duped one too many times.
Listen, when it started happening, because I'm pretty squeamish about poop when it started happening, I was like, oh no. But I laughed quite a bit, and it's like 87 minutes or something.
Nice.
So it's like sharp, but quite funny. There is a like joke song in it that I think is like a quite good song. About selling crack. It is funny, silly nonsense, and it takes place in 2007.
Okay, that's cool.
So if you are approximately our age, it has a lot of stuff where I'm just like, yep, I remember that from high school,
college,
yes,
stuff, yeah.
And it made me think about how are the early 2000s the most aesthetically vacuous time, like
100%.
the ugliest, nastiest.
Dang, yes. Just as a fan of like rap music, just thinking about rap videos from the early 2000s and the aesthetic is just nightmarish. The long tees.
I think some of that is the better stuff, even
honestly,
that's
true.
of the time. Like this has like, I'll just say this. There's a like one of the woman characters is like wearing like an Invader Zim backpack.
Okay.
You know, like kind of has that pop punk aesthetic is infused with a lot of
Skater
it.
boy.
Yes.
The skater boy look.
Yeah. Cool. Highly recommend. If you're in Tallahassee, please come see it at the Tallahassee Film Festival on August 31st at the end of this month. And if you're not in Tallahassee, keep an eye out. Watch it on VOD. Go see it if you have a local festival that's playing it, because it is absolutely worth it.
Hell yeah.
If you can handle it.
Cool.
So
yeah.
Now that we've talked about that, Craig, you want to share a personal event under this current event?
Yeah, normally we do current events that aren't as personal, but I'm gonna be a little bit more personal, and I probably reveal too much about my job that I kind of don't that often, but I am in fact a middle school teacher here in Tallahassee, and I work at a school that has been around for 66 years on the south side of Tallahassee, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods in Tallahassee. We are a Title I school, and in 66 years this school
what is Title I?
What does that Title mean I schools are kids that are are schools that are comprised of students that are, I think it's 85% economically disadvantaged, which in America is, you know, often in minority neighborhoods and things like that. Our school has not gotten a higher than a C grade in its 66-year history until this past year, because we got a B for the first time ever, and it was really cool. It was like what we've been working hard for, and it comes with some extra stuff. Our school gets like a ton more funding, which is completely backwards from how school grading should work, by the way.
Yeah, boo to that, but
boo to how it works,
to the system,
but we
but
gotta
yay!
play the game. And so so we get more money. I get more money, which I just found out. Apparently we get a bonus, so it's
That's
down
cool.
the road though. We had to vote on it and all that. But yeah, it was just awesome. Like we pushed these kids really hard, and it was really cool. Like, I've not been a teacher that long. This is my 5th year now, but never until last year had I seen kids so like invested in their scores. We were talking about that because I've come back to work now from the summer, that we were reflecting on the last few days on how like kids were just running up to everybody being like, I got this score and a this score and a this score, which was really cool just to like get these kids who like a lot of them written off by society in general at like getting excited about their testing scores, which is that's like sounds stupid, but that's a cool thing to see kids. I
don't think it sounds stupid.
Like bragging about their test scores. So
I think it's it's amazing that children have been provided a community context in which people are investing in them and they feel like they can invest in themselves. That's great. That's not stupid at all. That's wonderful.
So we're shooting for an A this year, which apparently we were 3 points away from.
Wow.
Yeah. So we were not only a B, and we were like, there's 9 middle schools in Tallahassee, and I think overall ranked 4th. We were the highest B, only behind the 3A schools in Tallahassee. So
that's amazing. Yeah. Air horse sounds, petty guns.
So, anyways, just wanted to brag on that. But what about you? What's got you celebrating or in despair?
It's the opposite of what you just talked about. I wanted to chat a little bit about Supreme Court reform, because it is something that Biden, in his little 11-minute speech, I think last week, said was one of his priorities after he spoke to the nation after stepping down. And it's something that his administration has kind of laid the groundwork for, or tried to, because in 2021, via executive order, he created a commission investigating Supreme Court reform, trying to get a bunch of different jurists and legal scholars and historians and stuff to put forth an assessment and recommendations about like what was possible historically, legally, etc. And like philosophically also. Now, that said, there have not been a lot of efforts by Democrats in the past to attempt court packing, like actually attempt it. FDR tried in 1937 and totally failed. And in terms of what we see right now, in terms of this happening, like is the ruling class interested in some part of it turning in on itself, right? But we see that like class interests coalesce to prevent things like this happening. The Democrats only have a very tenuous lead in the Senate, right? 51-49, including independents that caucus with Democrats. And they really refuse, they being the Democrats again here, refuse to address the filibuster issue. So as a reminder, if you don't know or you ejected out of your head, which is very fair, when the filibuster is deployed, it requires that a supermajority approval of 60 votes is needed to end endless debate. Like basically when the Senate is taking on a bill, people can endlessly debate unless 60 of 100 votes to end the debate. And therefore, the filibuster is actually the barrier to getting something passed, not the actual votes to get it passed, right? Because if you can't vote in the first place, it doesn't matter if you have the 51 votes to make it, to put forth the bill. So what is actually included in Biden's suggestions? So what do we actually mean even by Supreme Court reform? Some of the suggestions include a term limit. I believe the one, he doesn't like explicitly say it. He didn't explicitly say it in his speech, but what has been put forth before is 18 years.
Should be short.
Term limit for Supreme Court justices.
I mean, term limit's good, but maybe shave off a few years from that.
But even when Democrats put this idea forth before in a bill in 2020, that obviously other things were going on in 2020 and it wasn't like really tackled. It would not have at that time in the previous incarnation, it wouldn't even apply to currently seated judges. So like one of the major problems is obviously fucking Clarence Ass Thomas, who has been on my literal entire life. Like he was seated in 1991.
In most of mine.
Okay. So nearly 33 years, because I think it was later. It was like, I think in the summer. And I'm born in March. By the way. Right. Just bring it full circle. Right. So, like, it wouldn't even affect him because it wouldn't apply to currently judges who are already in there. It would only apply, like, moving forward. And given that Trump was able to place 3 people on who are, 2 of whom are relatively young, well, and Gorsuch is young, too. So, like, it basically it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter unless they apply it to everyone. And again, we don't have, like, a concrete bill this time. I'm just basing it on what the Democrats previously have proposed actually in written legislation. So maybe that would be adjusted. And it also creates a dynamic of why would the Democrats expend political capital to do something that is monumentous, which I mean not just the outcome is monumentous, but the effort required to do that politically would be Herculean. So why would they do that if it would solve nothing now, right? So it would need to apply to currently seated judges. So hopefully there's a final proposal that includes that. Yeah. The other thing that Biden suggested was an ethics code, which is crazy because all other judges in the United States have one. Supreme Court does not.
They don't need it.
Yeah. That would also outline recusals. So like expectations for when judges would recuse themselves.
Like if your wife tried to organize a coup against the state.
We're just going to call it the Ginny clause. Yeah. If your wife is Ginny, you should recuse yourself. You should recuse. Now, the thing that was like not really, there was not really a solid outcome from this commission, the Supreme Court Reform Commission that was born out of the 2021 executive order of whether or not these kind of proposals could be done purely legislatively, or if they would have to pursue a constitutional amendment, which, again, if you're not familiar, would require legislative process and then also has to be ratified by a certain number of states. So that's a really tall order. That does not happen very frequently, right? That has not happened in our lifetime, basically. So, yeah. And I say all of this to say, like, as leftists, I'm always, like, torn between pragmatism of caring about this. It matters, right? We see very concretely, like, the Chevron decision is going to fuck shit up. We already see how Dobbs has affected us. Again, layers and layers of the Supreme Court has gummed up, right, the pipes. And I do care about that and its concrete impact on people's lives. But there's, like, also this overarching issue of all of this is oriented towards trying to make, like, ostensibly towards trying to make an independent judiciary. But we just know that, like, the judiciary is, like, never... even if it is independent from, quote unquote, the biases of the political parties and partisan interests, it will never represent the will of the people. Yeah. And that the U.S. system just really doesn't have checks and balances on these motherfuckers.
At all.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good news.
Stuff.
Good news, everyone.
Well, before we get out of the news segment, I did want to ask, because we mentioned, are you also sad that it's Jover, but ready for it to commence? My sister sends me like the cringiest lib memes all the time, and that one really got me when she sent it. I was like, oh god, it made my stomach hurt when I saw that.
I'll say this. I will vote for her.
I will too.
I abstain from general endorsements of elected officials, especially those at the federal level, beyond what I think are purely functional requirements.
Yeah.
I am somewhat enthusiastic that I think just overall this improves our chances of not having Trump be president a second time.
Yeah.
And so for that, I am glad. But she is, was a prosecutor, is not good on any foreign relation interests, including Gaza and Palestine.
Yeah. She's slightly better than Biden in that she's paid lip service to it, but even this week she put out a
throwing the protesters under the bus. So
and a statement about how awful it was that what's happening in Gaza, but not reflecting on who is doing it, which seemed like kind of tone deaf.
Right, just like taking out the agent. Like,
right, yeah.
Yeah, I oppose violence in general, but ignoring that like conflicts are actually enacted by states and entities that can be named. Yeah. So I am not coconut pilled. But
okay, so people are into that now?
Yes.
Okay, because I've known that clip for years as an embarrassing clip that gets passed around on the internet that I've laughed at frequently. And my friends were like, have you seen the coconut thing? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, it's changing the tide. And I was like, wait, what? This is not just an embarrassing clip?
Yeah, I don't know that most people have interpreted it as embarrassing even prior to the most recent. Like, I don't interpret it as embarrassing. I interpret it as she was raised by a Marxist, but is not.
Yeah.
And so, like, has these, like, verbal hang-ups that are reminiscent of what a professor who is a Marxist would say.
In it is necessarily embarrassing. I just think the faux politician of how the clip comes out is so fucking cringy.
I think it.
Laughing when no one else is laughing, which she is a corner. She is
that
great
is
at that.
That is a thing that she loves to do.
Also, this is not me shitting on her laugh. I don't care. I love that she has her hearty laugh. I know that is a weird Republican thing. This is me shitting on people when they laugh at their own jokes when no one else is laughing.
I think it is kind of endearing is not the right word, but I think it does make her feel human.
For sure. Yeah.
And I think that one of the not to be all like lib femme, but there's an idea in the sociological literature on gender and work called the competency likability dilemma, that women in the workplace, especially women in leadership, can be viewed as competent or they can be viewed as likable. And I think she has navigated a weird line where she's kind of neither, but
right.
Like it's like a weird mosaic of both sides and neither side. And in terms of us beating Trump, I think that the memeability and people I think it maybe helps a little bit with one of those categories, you know what I mean?
And another, I can't remember, I heard someone say this on a podcast, but I was like, oh man, spot on, is that Joe dropping out has now done the really funny thing of magnetizing Trump as the old one now.
Yes.
Which is very funny.
Oh, I definitely think there's the framing that the Trump campaign has used. There's I can't remember the exact phrase, but there's this idea that once you establish a frame, meaning the way you're messaging, the way you're talking about something, that as the situation shifts, that frame can get out of control and then shifts. It defines it defines what the conversation is from then on, even if it's not ideal. And so by talking about age constantly, once Biden was removed, they're left with that frame.
Is still going.
They're left with that frame and they're like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
So there is what I'm about to say, go ahead. I accept that this is maybe worthy of judgment. But there is a little bit of chaos agent in me that's well, at least this is more of a good time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think that's... you didn't create the situation for there to be a good... If you were creating the situation for there to be a good time, that would be shitty. But if you're just enjoying the fucking show, I don't think that's...
I did not just fall out of a coconut tree unaware of the context.
And you know what? I almost... Last episode, I wrote in something about falling out of a coconut tree in the intro, and then I was like, that's too stupid, and I took it out. Now I wish I should have kept it.
There's a group chat I'm in that's just a Discord where you can use different emojis to respond to things, where coconut reaction is running strong. So
hell yeah. Well, are we ready to dive into the movie that we came here to talk about?
Let's do it.
Hell yeah. Well, we are watching our third movie in a row about the life of Ernesto Che Guevara, the Argentine revolutionary famed for his actions in Cuba as well as other places in South America. This will be our final installment on this series, and I'm glad we watched this after Soderbergh's two-part biopic, because the Motorcycle Diaries, which I don't know if I said the title there, but we're watching the Motorcycle Diaries. There is no built up version of this mystified Che Guevara. It's simply Ernesto Guevara de la Serna before he became Che, the figurehead. The Motorcycle Diaries, which takes place in 1952, 5 years before Che Guevara would meet the Castro brothers in Mexico City. It's a travelogue more than anything else, often moving at a laconic pace, chronicling Guevara's 8,000-mile road trip with his friend Alberto Granado. Both Guevara and Granado are medical students from affluent families living in the suburbs of Buenos Aires. Curious and compassionate, Guevara's political ideology was still a bit amorphous before embarking on this journey. I mentioned on the other ones that I had been reading a lot of his diaries and things like that, and he was not this isn't to say he wasn't politically aware. He was just a voracious reader that wanted to consume everything. And the way I view this trip that he went on was almost like taking all the knowledge that he had consumed and condensing it into a like belief system almost. But Guevara's tour of South America would open his eyes to the state of his beloved continent. Growing up an avid reader of everything from poetry to political and economic philosophy, Guevara's journey finally allowed him to see the inequities wrought by capitalist and imperialist forces, from observing the working conditions of miners in Chile to the treatments of lepers in Peru. And having read the Motorcycle Diaries first, what's striking to me is this noticeable shift we see in Che from adventurer and explorer to someone who's had the scales fall from his eyes. For instance, early on in the journey, Che viewed what they were doing as daring and bold, expecting to face dangers he read about in adventure novels. But as their journey continued, Che's perspective shifted from a more self-centered reason for the journey, i.e. that danger and discovery, to a more reflective view. And I think this is encapsulated well in a pair of letters that Ernesto wrote to his father and his aunt. And I think during this episode, I'm going to read, like when we get to these various parts, I want to read kind of the reflections from his diary. But yeah, that change of what he saw the trip as at the beginning versus what it ended up being. So the first letter he wrote to his Aunt Beatrice says, "It turns out the Amazon is as safe as Parana and Putumayo as safe as Paraguay. This means I won't be able to bring you a shrunken head as a gift as I intended. I hope you will be able to forgive your loving nephew who, victim of impetuosity of his young age, came up with such a harebrained scheme." Which I think really kind of like shows the conversations he was having with his loved ones about what he thought the voyage would be like. And then just a day or so later, both of these letters were written at the end of the journey, but just a day or so later, he wrote to his father saying, "The banks of the great river have been completely colonized. To find savage tribes, one needs to travel deeper into the tributary," and basically is reflecting more on what he actually found. Yet the tone of these letters indicates a shift that is central to the Motorcycle Diaries, a shift that took Ernesto's sense of adventure and danger and aimed it away from the fantastical and apocryphal and towards more concrete notions of injustice in the world that Che hadn't really experienced firsthand. So let's talk about our initial reactions. What did you think of the movie?
I think that it is beautiful and uses, in terms of its camera work and directorial style and cinematography, more of that documentarian style that we saw in parts of Che Part 1 and Part 2 that Soderbergh deployed. This is not my kind of movie.
Yeah.
It's a little languishing.
For sure.
And I prefer... I'm a maximalist. I want to be drowned with ideas, and this movie is really asking you to sit with the journey, which I think is beautifully wrought. It's just not my preference.
Yeah.
But
I had a sneaking suspicion that it might not be. Because we've had conversations about the style of narrative that this movie is, and it not being your cup of tea.
But again, I think worthwhile, and people have different, style preferences. What about you, Craig? I think it'd be great if, I know you're going to dig into some of those specific passages that are drawn out, but can you tell us a little bit about like what kind of key differences you see between his actual diary and this film? And is the modality of film appropriate for telling the story that you read in his diary, his actual diary?
I'll say I think I liked it more because I had read it already. Because obviously it's a diary, so there's so much of his voice that's missing from the movie, even though the movie does have that narrative piece of like him doing the voiceover throughout, but it doesn't go that deep. I think there is a little bit of lost context to some of these situations that you get by hearing him, like, because the diary itself is not as much it is more him like working out thoughts in his head than really saying like a lot about where they were, if that makes sense. Like he'll say, and then we went to the mines, and there's not a whole lot of description of the events that took place as much as there are the impact on him. So I think that is a little bit that is missing from the fact that this is a movie and not the diary itself, is that we miss some of that. And then, speaking of key differences, there are a few. Well, first off, let me say the movie is based on his diary and Alberto's. And I've not read Alberto's, so if I'm saying this wasn't in there and it was in Alberto's, maybe it was. But there are a few key differences.
I will say, just very quickly on that, we'll talk more later about like some of the production of this movie, but that guy was involved in the making of this movie. He was he was in his 80s,
or was still alive.
Yeah, he might not be anymore because he was in his 80s when this movie was being made.
Yeah. Still in Cuba too, because he lived in Cuba after the revolution and became a doctor and all this.
Yeah, so he provided some insights and was involved in the like pre-production.
Okay, cool. One thing I did love that translates from both the book and the movie is their like camaraderie together, which is really fun. They don't fight as much in the diary, at least from Che's side. Maybe Alberto's diary they do.
He's like, we were fucking fighting all the time, man.
Yeah. But I really loved, because this does come up in the diary, about how terrible of a dancer Che is, and that keeps coming up because Alberto makes him like try to dance at like any social event they go to, and I like that a bit. The one big change that did irk me a little bit, and it's a minor change, but I think they did it in a way that was trying to make Che more of the legend, and I don't think that's appropriate for him, is that at the end of the movie they go to a leper colony, which is kind of their goal overall. They've been studying leprosy. They lie a bunch about what their studies are to basically survive on the trip, but their end goal was they knew of this leprosy colony and they could help and offer all this stuff. So they go to the leprosy colony, and they are, obviously we've talked about Che being like a compassionate, caring person, and we see that there too. And on one of their last nights there, it's Che's birthday, and he's drunk, and they're separated, right? The leprosy colony is on like one side of the village of this river, and then where the people like Che and the doctors are on the other. And he has this moment where he's like, I want to go be with the people, and he jumps off the dock and drunkenly swims across the river to join the lepers. I went and double checked the book to make sure. Am I misremembering? But the way it actually happened was the lepers got in a canoe and came to the other side. And it's this moment in the movie where like they're like, the river is really strong. He has asthma. He's drunk. He could die. And it's played up as this like monumental moment where he's gonna go face the danger to go be with these people, which I think is an unnecessary change, especially for like, I mean, we're going to talk about like vanguardism and the idea that there isn't just one singular like figurehead or whatever. I don't know. It just seemed too like myth making when that wasn't even needed to begin with. But other than that, they're pretty closely
aligned.
Tied. Yeah. Thanks. I will say the part with his girlfriend at the beginning is a little bit more drawn out in this story. He writes a lot about her and the dog, which great surprise when a dog shows up. If their bike crashes all the time, and on the first crash, a dog spills out that Che was hiding from Alberto, and I love that moment. I thought that was great. But yeah, well, before we dive into the plot of the movie, how do you want to kind of talk about what vanguardism is and what that means and how it relates?
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about vanguardism because, as we've talked about in the previous episodes associated with Che, Che ultimately, he's not exclusively a Marxist-Leninist because there is, kind of a unique Latin American flavor and his the specific like Cuban liberation element, but he is heavily influenced by and tied to Marxist-Leninism. Mm-hmm. And a big part of Marxist-Leninism and from Lenin's writings is a specific teleological, by which I mean a series of stages that progress into each other, right? There's a specific track basically that is followed to that human progress follows, from capitalism to from capitalism to socialism to communism, right? And that the stages of getting there need to be followed sequentially, basically. And the idea of vanguardism is that there are a group of highly educated people who kind of have connections to the proletariat, but may come from like the petty bourgeoisie, and are like the spark that helps initiate a vanguard party that follows democratic centralism models, or a democratic centralism model. And then that is what like sparks the revolution. So the reason why I'm bringing it up here is because Che is a very emblematic, basically, character or figure in this kind of approach, because he was, right, trained as a doctor, highly educated, especially for that time period in the region that he was from in Argentina. He's from a rich family, and he then, had this consciousness raising experience that is captured in this movie, and then goes on to connect with other people that have basically had very similar experiences, and they together form a party that then initiates a revolution, right? So some key elements here are that like the ideas that the high education component allows these folks to harness theory, and that the vanguard, as defined by Lenin, are required to display heroicism in doing things that haven't been done before, striking out boldly, taking risks, all in service of accumulating power alongside the proletariat. So, the next essential step is the vanguard joining forces with the proletariat and other working masses. We've already seen that in Che Part 1, especially, right? And Lenin really outlined and emphasized that having the correct revolutionary theory is necessary. If you know anything about Lenin, you know he hated anarchists. And that's another reason why the education, they conceived of it as a really important component, that you have to have that ability and knowledge and skill to be analytical and see the stages as they progress. So again, why this is like relevant here is because Che is the embodiment of this principle. We see him in the process of consciousness development, and it's really what this movie is, from my perspective, is like the very earliest stages of what Lenin is talking about with vanguardism developing. And I was thinking about it a lot because Walter Salles, is that because the double
Salles, but maybe
because the double L,
Salles.
He is the director of this movie. In 2004, he gave a long form interview at the British Film Institute at the National Film Theatre that they run, and he referred to this film as capturing, this is a quote, a small story which preceded history with a capital H. So I want to bring up vanguardism, one, because I'm always trying to talk a little bit about theory, but also because I feel like that is what's happening here. We're seeing that small story right before everything exploded, and he really was part of that blaze of glory in developing a vanguard party.
And that quote from the director goes along pretty well to the quote that they play at the beginning and the end, where it's Che from the diary saying that this is just a small story about lives that ran parallel for 6 months or whatever it was, which is like a lot.
And then kind of an extension of or going kind of in the same realm, but going off in a different direction. One of the other things that, and this is more about kind of all three movies than this movie specifically, but one of the things that kind of interests me about Che, beyond what we've discussed in the series already, is a contrast between then and now in terms of notions of leadership, the role of well-educated radicals, the vanguard, and like how those things are not the same. We don't conceive of them the same way, as they were conceived of then. I think now, if someone were to do this, right? If we're to have Che's basically exact experiences, write this book, it would be interpreted as rich kid adventurism.
Sure. And I think it was then too. And I think Che was aware of that. I was pulling up in the diary here where he talks about there's a moment in the movie that we'll talk about in a minute where they come across a couple that are looking for work at a mine that are basically homeless and like vagabonds because they were communists and persecuted. And he basically it says that he picks up on, although the man doesn't say it, a bit of resentment towards Che. He says they talk for a while, and then the man that they meet says, "Come, comrades, let's eat together. I, too, am a tramp," showing his underlying disdain for the parasitic nature he saw in our aimless traveling. So I think there was a consciousness on Che of being like, I am playing a part of a rich kid adventurer, and I think that probably helped a little bit in like not taking himself too seriously and having the opportunity to have his eyes opened. But no, I think it definitely would be now, and even probably was then too. So
that's that I'm glad to have that anecdote injected here, because I think maybe part of what I see is that we can only now, like retroactively looking at Che, see everything all in its collective in the full trajectory that he underwent, rather than like seeing that at the time, right? Until like that's at the moment that it was occurring, that there was that interpretation. And it makes you think that, you know, a key difference for Che obviously is that the outcome matters, but that he then went and sought other people that wanted to convert that consciousness that had been raised into material action for working people and for peasants. Whereas maybe now that gets converted into, that kind of will gets converted into like non-profit, like the non-profit industrial complex, right? You're like, okay, well maybe I'll become a doctor for Doctors Without Borders or whatever. And he was like, no, we're gonna go fuck their shit up.
He says there's very little allusions to what like Che will become, but there is one part where Alberto says, I can't remember what the line is, but he responds with something like, a revolution without violence is no revolution at all, or something like that. And but yeah, let's break down some of the basically, like we said, the plot is languid. It moves slow. But I do want to like kind of break down some of the stops on the trip that are the most profound to Che. And we can start with the communist couple that they meet. Well, first off, let me ask, what did you think of that moment? It's short, but I think I really liked that in the movie and in the book. But if just to remind, they're going to this mine that they've heard about called Chuquicamata, that is run by a conglomerate, and they want to see it. And on the way there, they run into this couple who identify as communists, and in his diary, I believe he also identifies as being indigenous to South America. What did you think of that segment there?
I think it's good. One thing that comes up a lot with Che is that I think is very prominent in this movie, and that this moment represents, is how much he sees himself as a Latin Americanist.
Yes, yeah.
That Argentina is important to his development of who he is, but he is not bound by the limits of nation or country, and is invested in all. And so I think having this like intersection with other folks so immediately really helps set the tone for that.
And the fact that I think also being persecuted for essentially, I won't say being Latin America, but like they come from a communist tradition in Chile, those two people, and were indigenous and found themselves in this predicament too. But I do want to read from the diary here so we can kind of get an idea of what that experience was like for him. He says, "We made friends with a married couple, Chilean workers who were communists. By the light of the single candle illuminating us, drinking mate and eating a piece of bread and cheese, the man's shrunken figure carried a mysterious, tragic air. In his simple, expressive language, he recounted his 3 months in prison and told us about his starving wife who stood by him with exemplary loyalty, his children left in the care of a kindly neighbor, his fruitless pilgrimage in search of work, and his compañeros, mysteriously disappeared and said to be somewhere at the bottom of the sea. The couple, numb with cold, huddling against each other in the desert night, were a living representation of the proletariat in any part of the world. They had not one single miserable blanket to cover themselves with, so we gave them one of ours, and Alberto and I wrapped the other around us as best we could. It was one of the coldest times in my life, but also one which made me feel a little more brotherly toward this strange, for me at least, human species. It's a great pity that they repress people like this. Apart from whether collectivism, the communist vermin, is a danger to decent life, the communism gnawing at his entrails was no more than a natural longing for something better, a protest against persistent hunger transformed into a love for this strange doctrine, whose essence he could never grasp, but whose translation, bread for the poor, was something which he understood and, more importantly, filled him with hope. Yeah. I like that. I feel like that is a good way to show, like, because Che at this point I don't think would have identified as a communist, but I think it's a good way to show his like mind frame, as he doesn't necessarily think of it as a political stance as much as it is like what human beings want deep down. This is the answer, the solution, I guess, is that you can talk politics all you want, but deep down the idea of communism is that bread for the poor, gnawing at you, like looking for the fairness and justice, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is a perfect example of like the consciousness is derived from the material conditions directly, right? Like it comes naturally from an evaluation of what is in front of him. Yeah.
I'll also say he's a really good writer, and like I really enjoy just reading his prose. It's that part I was not expecting. I just thought it would be, interesting, but he is a really, really good writer. But yeah, so, one part I want to go back to, because I do like it, is the newspaper trick. Did you have fun with the newspaper trick? Because I do like the newspaper trick.
I think it's good to have some dynamicism.
Yeah. So their motorcycle breaks down pretty early on, named La Poderosa, which I don't know if the one you watched, but they never called it that. Like, I read the diary translated into English, of course, and they never called it its English name, the Mighty One, but that's all they call it in the movie. But La Poderosa, and it was actually La Poderosa 2 because Alberto crashed the original one that before they started. But once their motorcycle breaks down and they're kind of stuck, they go through a bunch of like schemes to trick people. Like, not, they're pretty like benign tricks, but my favorite one is they go to a newspaper and basically build up their credentials to sound way more important than they are, and then just carry the newspaper to like different places, like can you fix our bike? Look, this is us in the newspaper, and just everyone's like, oh hell yeah. Which is awesome.
Truly things that are only possible because the stage of technological development.
I was imagining like that now, and like getting your face in a newspaper and then trying to bring it to somebody, and
or you're like on Instagram, you're like look, what? I'm really big on TikTok.
I don't fucking care.
But it speaks to like his cunning and like impishness. We've talked about that before. He does have this like there's a little sparkle, you know.
And I will say in the diaries, it's always Alberto who's like the one to want to do the like
interesting
subterfuge.
Okay.
And Che is a little bit more like ethically inclined, but it's always Che who comes up with the better ideas when they're like,
which makes sense because he's incredibly strategic. That's what we see when he's kind of fully has grown into his own.
Yeah. One thing that is in the diary that's not in the movie, and I'm glad, I can understand why, but it is a slightly funny anecdote, is that they accidentally shot a dog. They stayed at some like farmer's barn, and the farmer was like, we got wolves out here. And there was like in the middle of the night growling and scratching at the barn door. And the way he writes is he rolled over and took his revolver and shot at the door, and the scratching stopped. And then when they woke up the next morning, they opened the door and were like, oh shit, and bailed before the farmer woke up and discovered what had happened. Which I'm like, okay, I understand why that was not in the movie, but it was still slightly funny while also being fucked up. But there's two really big stops before we get to the leper colony that I think had the biggest effect on Che, which the first is the Chuquicamata copper mine, which was a enormous mine in Chile that was basically the land was just being stripped by foreign companies coming in, and that was really, I think, an eye-opening thing to see, like these broken down people just struggling for pennies, basically doing this really, really brutal work at these copper mines. But the movie spends very little time on it. I think that's something that I would have liked to see a little bit more in the copper mines. But maybe that's a limitation of being exclusively from Che's perspective, the movie, that we don't get a lot of that. But I do feel like the movie doesn't quite capture how impactful that seemed to be for him.
I do think in terms of our journey through these 3 movies, and it's very interesting that workers in the mines and conflict and or strikes or exploitation surrounding that are both kind of like the beginning and the end of his journey, right? But like within the confines of the Motorcycle Diaries itself, it's one of only of many, right? But I think that in terms of thinking collectively about the portrayal of Che's life, it could have been drawn out more, because it obviously is deeply impactful to his political development, but that's not necessarily like the number one priority of this movie.
And I think he's discovering it as he goes too, and it's harder to show that in action as much as it is in a diary, like in moments of self-reflection, right? Because
you're constantly recontextualizing, like as he gains additional information, whereas visually you're existing in one moment at any point in time.
But you are correct in that is like the thing of any of these, to me, the thing that radicalized him the most against capitalism was seeing like the machinations of how these mines work. And I do want to return to his diary real quick just to read what he said about the mines, the Chuquicamata mines. He says, an economic and political battle is being waged in Chile between a coalition of nationalist and left-wing groups that advocate nationalizing the mines and those who, in the cause of free enterprise, prefer a well-run mine, even in foreign hands, to possibly less efficient management by the state. Serious accusations have been made in Congress against the companies currently exploiting the concessions, symptomatic of the climate of nationalist aspiration surrounding copper production. Whatever the outcome of the battle, one would do well not to forget the lesson taught by the graveyards of the mines, containing only a small share of the immense number of people devoured by cave-in, silica, and the hellish climate of the mountain. I think especially like the way he feels we see later in Cuba towards the peasantry and the working class, I think being in these mines was a big part of kind of opening his eyes to the condition of the worker. Because, again, he was raised kind of a rich kid, and I don't think was exposed to a lot of like harsh working conditions until this. Yeah.
And I mean, we see later again in Che Part 1 by Soderbergh that he has really reached a point of like in his political development where he's really centering peasants.
Right.
And I think some of that is just like his humanistic spirit that obviously led him to be a doctor, led him to have the like pursue these inquiries in the first place.
Right.
But some of it has to be like these past experiences of seeing how vital workers are and how they face exploitation and like they need to be centered in any battle to overthrow the forces that oppress them.
Yeah, again, that's why I'm glad that we did this one last, because it's fun to see like the little nuggets of like what would become his like revolutionary philosophy kind of like sprouting up in those moments. So we didn't really talk about the trail he takes. I would say that for a second. So the trail is starts in like basically the middle of Argentina, goes down south, up through Chile, all the way up, and then hits Peru, and I left somewhere off, didn't I? Argentina, Chile, Peru. What did I leave off?
Didn't they go to Brazil?
They end in the Amazon, like really close, right. I think, to Peru and Brazil, and then end I think they end in Venezuela, because I think Alberto gets a job that he was trying to apply for in Caracas, I think.
Okay.
But they might dip into Brazil for a moment or two. But I think they end in Caracas, Venezuela, because that's where they part for quite a while, actually.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. You can say
I was going to say this at the end, and I will still cover some stuff. But since we're talking about the path specifically, the director stated in that same interview that he followed the path twice.
Jesus.
Before they filmed it, which was a third time. Now, they didn't follow like the exact trail, obviously, but they replicated it basically as closely as possible. So can you imagine doing that like 3 times in the course of like a couple of years, basically.
That would be awesome.
Nuts.
I mean, just to do it once. I didn't mean 3 times, but I would like to do it once. And another one of the big like moments that I want to talk about is, I think we've talked about how we've seen how his views on kind of communism are forming, his views on workers, and then a big one that really motivated, I think, everything is his views on what happened to Latin America and what Latin America could have been sans imperialism and exploitation. And we see that mostly when he visits Machu Picchu, which he kind of, it's almost did you get the sense in the film that it was like a spiritual, like almost like religious for him? Because he's not a religious guy, but it is
right. But he is moved,
big time, yeah. And I will return once more to his diary to kind of give you an idea of what the internal dialogue was in Machu Picchu. He says, in reality, it hardly matters what the primitive origins of the city are. The most important and irrefutable things, however, is that here we found the pure expression of the most powerful indigenous race in the Americas, untouched by a conquering civilization and full of immensely evocative treasures between its walls. The walls themselves have died from the tedium of having no life between them. The spectacular landscape circling the fortress supplies an essential backdrop, inspiring dreamers to wander its ruins for the sake of it. North American tourists, constrained by their practical worldview, are able to place those members of the disintegrating tribes they may have seen in their travels amongst these once living walls, unaware of the moral distance separating them, since only the semi-indigenous spirit of the South American can grasp the subtle differences. Which, yeah, I think that kind of shapes his idea of Latin America as this pure place that is basically infected by outside forces.
Well, and it conditions him to be, I'm going to use the word susceptible, which I think sometimes implies weakness, but I don't mean that.
You're
but
right, yeah.
Makes him susceptible to Marxist-Leninism is
Sure.
because that is one of the defining features. It's present in Marxism as a whole, but why Lenin was able to be so successful, and those that continued in his kind of under his leadership and ideological guidance to be so successful in the 20th century is because of his anti-imperialism, right? That the third world can look and see, well, there are two groups of superpowers forming, and one of them thinks that they get to dominate us, and the other is trying to fight for independence and to buck off the yoke of imperialism.
Yeah.
So I think even if this is ultimately still political, you
Right.
know, in terms of that
100%.
raising that consciousness and making him more liable to find a home with the communists.
Yeah. And so like we mentioned before, and we go briefly over this part because we talked about it quite a bit, but the movie basically coalesces. No, I don't think that's the word I was looking for. The basically concludes. There we go. The big if there is any climax or conclusion set piece, it is the leper colony where we see again another thing that we see in Che Part 1 and Part 2, which is this need and desire to heal and help the sick and wounded. One thing that the movie does that is not in his diary that I remember, but maybe it was in Alberto's, is there's a very effective moment where they arrive at the leper colony, which is run by nuns. That this part is true in the diary, that if you didn't go to mass, they just didn't give you food. And Che and Alberto were not interested in mass, so they went several times on their week or two stay where they just weren't allowed dinner because the nuns physically kept keeping them from dinner because they didn't attend mass. But we see that it's run really strictly, and they tell them when they're getting on the boats to go to the leper colony to put on gloves, and Che immediately says, "I'm not going to do that," and then makes a point when he gets there to use his hands and touch all of these people afflicted with leprosy, shake their hands, touch their heads, and cuts away to people kind of being why is he fucking doing this? Which I think is another great moment of even if it's invented for the movie, and I think it does reflect that spirit of his that we were talking about of relating to people, relating to the common man, and knowing those little human things that will allow you to relate to people. Like the second they say put on gloves, he's like, fuck no. And I think that is kind of a cool moment there.
Yeah, and several of the people that are depicted as being in the leper colony actually are people who were in leper colonies.
Yeah, for sure.
In Latin America.
Yeah. Because some of them are advanced stages that we see, and it's just it's very uplifting, but also supremely fucked up to imagine being in those conditions. But yeah, so we're getting to the end here, and there is one more part of his diary that I want to share, which is actually not in the diary. It's one of the only parts in the diary that is listed as a, I think the title of the chapter is a note in the margin without a date on it. But we spoke about vanguardism and the idea that revolution is not sparked by any one person, but by class-conscious individuals who have the ability to educate and organize, seeing themselves not as a great man or woman, but as a simple piece in the larger revolutionary machine. This is a revelation that Che had throughout the journey described in Motorcycle Diaries. And this one kind of post hoc bit, a note in the margin, Che reflects on the final nights of their journey in Caracas, where he comes across this old man that he describes as kind of being like an adventurer like him. And Che says has wandered from country to country, gathering thousands of adventures until he and his bones finally ended up in the isolated region, patiently waiting for the moment of great reckoning. And this strange man left Che with something that would inspire his revolutionary actions going forth. So this is Che recalling what the man said to him, and it really struck me, and I just wanted to close on it. He said, the man says this, and there's also something very prophetic about Che's life and death in this that is kind of striking as well. Che recalls the man saying, "The future belongs to the people, and gradually or in one strike, they will take power here and in every country. The terrible thing is the people need to be educated, and this they cannot do before taking power, only after. They can only learn at the cost of their own mistakes, which will be very serious and will cost many innocent lives. Or perhaps not. Maybe those lives will not have been innocent because they will have committed the huge sin against nature, meaning a lack of ability to adapt. All of them, those unable to adapt, you and I, for example, will die cursing the power they helped through great sacrifice to create. Revolution is impersonal. It will take their lives, even utilizing their memory as an example or as an instrument for domesticating the youth who follow them. My sin is greater because I, more astute and with greater experience, call it what you like, will die knowing that my sacrifice stems only from an inflexibility symbolizing our rotten civilization which is crumbling. I also know, and this won't alter the course of history or your personal view of me, that you will die with a clenched fist and a tense jaw, the epitome of hatred and struggle, because you are not a symbol, some inanimate example, but a genuine member of the society to be destroyed. The spirit of the beehive speaks through your mouth and motivates your actions. You are as useful as I am, but you are not aware of how useful your contribution is to the society that sacrifices you." Yeah, so I like that a lot, and was kind of, I mean, the line about him dying with a clenched fist and a tense jaw, you know, after the last two episodes, pretty spot on.
Yeah. The man was a seer.
Yeah. But well, before we conclude, what anything that you would like to add about the Motorcycle Diaries?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about the director. I kind of seeded some stuff in throughout, but this movie was made very thoughtfully. You know, he spent at various times in this interview, he says basically it took like 3 to 5 years for them to like put this movie together, including taking that journey that's mapped out in the film twice before they then again followed it while shooting. He also said, which was very interesting to me, that Robert Redford was essential in getting this movie made. Huh. Robert Redford at the time in the early 2000s was running like the Sundance Institute, which is what how the director Walter Salles got some like international recognition. I believe he is Brazilian because he had a movie that was like pretty popular, got some like indie cred, and that Robert Redford was really central to mobilizing money, like getting the funding to make this movie. And that he talked to him a lot about, Redford talked to the director a lot about how to turn the book into the film. And Yeah. So I was like, that's really interesting.
I have plenty of examples, but I feel like I've heard other stories of Redford doing that.
Yeah, I think he seemed like a good guy,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Wait, is he dead? He's not dead, is he?
Is he?
I don't think he is.
Okay, why don't you look that up while I say this next thing? I will say, while Redford and the director are trying to get funding together, the director said that a lot of studios rejected the film because of its unconventional structure.
Yeah.
The fact that it is very influenced by the director's documentarian past, that there is not a 3-act structure in the movie, and that there's no explicit conflict guiding the movie. So not shocking. We talked about that. And I also want to say that the director is pretty based. He was one of the directors that signed that like pro-Palestinian letter.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah. What was that? I think that was in January of this year, of January 2024. Yeah. So he's a pretty cool guy.
Yeah. Also, Robbie Red's not dead. 87 years young.
Okay, well, I shouldn't speak that into existence because maybe he's still rocking out there in the free world.
Doing all right. Still looking good, too. Full head of hair.
So, I think that's...
speaking of looking good.
Oh.
We've tracked this in other movies, but is this the hottest that Gael Garcia Bernal is?
Oh,
there were a few times I was watching with my wife, she went, oh.
It is hard because the man is... very attractive.
Yeah.
I think in oh my god, Bad Education.
Okay.
The Almodovar film. Pretty hot.
Is it because he's doing hot things?
No.
Because I would say, I know
like,
También
yeah.
brought up, but I feel like that's a cheat because they're having sex all the time. So of course you're going to think he's hot. We need a movie where he's just looking hot.
His hair is like a little longer. And I mean, just Almodovar directorially speaks more to me.
Yeah, me too.
So the way, he is framed. But he also, there's a lot of gender stuff going on in Bad Education. So that's also, I liked some gender fuckery. But cool. So I'm maybe more inclined to say there, but he is, I am in no way disparaging his attractiveness in this movie.
Yeah. Again,
he's delivering.
My wife was like just making a few noises at one point, like just a lingering shot of him in like a sunset, and she was like, ooh.
Yeah, he's serving communist cunt here,
Hell yeah. You know who didn't like this movie?
Ew.
And like calls in his review Che like a murderer and like a demon.
Is it
not our boy?
No, okay.
Roger Ebert.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought he was a little bit more politically left.
Once the man put the script for Beyond the Valley of the Dolls out into the universe, I think his need to be right about anything else ever evaporated for me personally. But yeah, that's not necessarily exactly what I would expect from him.
Yeah, he also called him a right-winger, like Fidel, a right-winger disguised as a communist, which is like, well, now you're just throwing out words.
Yeah, sir, you simply don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
But do we have anything else to add? And if not, do we want to preview our next...
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add about this. Do you or should I go into it? For our next, we are going to do another 3-part series. We're going to cover Italians talking about fascism.
Hell yeah.
So we are going to do, I think, what will be our most intense.
I was going to say I've only seen one of these, but the others are like that one.
Our most intense, most content warning series yet. First, we're going to go in chronological order, in the order that the films were released. Which I think also makes sense in terms of the content of the films. But if I decide that that's not the case later, let it be known that is because the films came out in this order. So the first is Visconti's 1969 film The Damned, which covers a German industrialist family who begin to get wrapped up in the Nazi Party. It is, in my opinion, the most beautiful film ever made. The best cinematography I've ever seen.
I'm excited for that.
It's very long. It's like almost 3 hours long, and it is balls to the wall insanity.
Okay.
Then we will watch Bertrand Bertolucci's
yeah.
1970 film The Conformist, which is about a man who maybe is just a fascist because he doesn't know what else to do.
All right.
Maybe.
That sounds cool.
And then
This is the one I've seen.
I'm presenting this as a bit of a challenge to myself because I have not watched this since I was 18 years old.
Yep.
I'm currently
I have not
33.
seen it since the first time I saw it. So.
And I've watched a lot of Pasolini films since then. And I think it's time to revisit it. And what better time to do it than in the context of talking about Italians wrestling with fascism in the mid-20th century? We're going to cover Salo.
Or
120 Days.
Yeah, of Sodom. Yeah. I just love putting an or when the title
Which
has
came
an
out
or.
1975, and that's obviously Pier Paolo Pasolini. So catch us on the flip, filthy, fuckery side of all of that. But The Damned comes next.
Okay. Cool. I'm excited. I'm really because those I know you've talked about The Damned before, and it's been on my list of to watch for a while, and I'm excited for that one specifically.
I just bought the Criterion.
Nice.
So
I didn't know they did one.
Yes.
Cool.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, we will get you when we talk about Italian fascists and gross stuff.
Bye.